U.S. President Barack Obama says his country is not threatened by China when it comes to trade with Africa. Speaking in South Africa, he said the relationship isn't as strong as it should be, but said his visit aims to improve all of that. China is Africa's largest trading partner. Peter Wakaba reports.
U.S. President Barack Obama sought to build a new U.S. economic partnership with Africa as he left Tanzania at the end of a tour of a fast-growing continent where Washington faces tough competition from China. Obama's trip to Africa that culminated in Dar es Salaam came 3 months after a visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping, who toured shortly after taking office. The highlight of the trip, the unveiling of Power Africa, a $7 billion initiative to double energy production on the continent.
We're going to start by investing $7 billion in U.S. government resources. We're going to partner with the private sector, who themselves have committed more than $9 billion in investment.
So then, just what was the reason behind Obama's Africa visit?
There's a lot of attention on Africa, and this time it's not attention based on charity. It's attention based on investments and building infrastructure. I think it cannot be emphasized enough that the countries that will, perhaps not all countries will benefit, but the countries that are most prepared in terms of having a good investment climate to start with, and having good projects in terms of infrastructure and all that.
In announcing the Power Africa initiative, the United States has chosen to change its focus from aid to trade facilitation, including building infrastructure. In Tanzania, Obama visited an independent power plant run since 2011 by US-based Symbion.
Even if it looks like it's a belated approach from the US, it shows that perhaps the US has taken a new look at Africa. Though I don't necessarily think it was new, but maybe using Obama's star power to highlight for American businesses and other people.
China, on the other hand, has built roads, airports and other infrastructure in Africa on a massive scale, with over $6 billion invested by the government over the last 6 years alone. The United States has increasingly become sidelined in issues of deep economic transformation on the African continent. President Barack Obama's trip to Africa then can be viewed through the prism of trying to support flagging US-Africa relations, as well as its interests on the African continent. How much of a success this trip has been, though, only time will tell. Peter Wakaba, CCTV, Nairobi, Kenya.
Stephen Hayes is the president and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa, a nonprofit organization aimed at promoting business and investment between the United States and Africa. He joins me now. What do you think the message is that the president's visit is sending to the business community in Africa?
Well, I think it's sending that the United States is ready to play, is much more serious, much more committed to a broader market than simply the 7 or 8 countries that we've worked traditionally with, particularly the oil countries. I think the message is we're going to be engaged with Africa a lot more actively.
You said they're prepared to play. China's been on the playing field for a while. Are they getting to the game a little late?
Well, it's late. China, I think China's entry has been very good for Africa overall. I have some problems with some of it, but I think that China is probably one of the best things that could have happened to Africa, in the sense that what China has done is not simply added to infrastructure development, especially in Africa, which is badly needed, but it's awakened everybody else around the world to the potential of Africa.
Who are the players that the U.S., you would say, are most interested in getting involved with?
Well, traditionally, the big players, of course, are the oil companies. If you take the investment of the U.S., 75% is energy related. But what we're seeing now is infrastructure companies. General Electric is a major player now, and I think is only going to get bigger. Power systems, because there's not a country in the world, not a country in Africa, including South Africa, that's meeting its current power needs. So there's going to be a surge in U.S. power companies engaged. And I think President Obama made that very clear. The IT companies are becoming far more engaged. And interesting to us, a gauge of our own organization is that we're seeing consumer products companies start to come in. The Walmarts, the Colgate-Palmolive, Procter & Gamble, all those are making major pushes. And finally, agribusiness companies are starting to become far more active.
I saw former President George W. Bush, who was on the continent, in fact, was appearing with President Obama at an event earlier today. But I saw him last year where he said that People get caught up in this competition between China and the United States, and competition is a good thing. Everybody ups their game. When it comes to the African continent, do you think that's the case?
I think competition is generally good. I think that it's helped Africa. I think it's awakened the United States. I think competition is inevitable. And I think there's also areas of cooperation that we can be working on. And I think as we look at the issues of climate change in the future, the scarcity of resources, I think cooperation is going to have to be examined a lot more than it is. But right now, I think the United States has to get into the game far more actively, and I've been very encouraged by President Obama's trip.
Talk to me about your narrative, Art, because you've been in this business, you've been able to track it, kind of watch it, this relationship between the U.S. and the African continent. How have things changed, and how does this help in shifting that momentum, do you think?
I was asked not too long ago, what's the changes in the last 5 years? I think it's changed politically in that Africa now feels stronger. It can say no to the United States, or it can say no to other countries now, when in the past they've been so dependent on the development process and traditional development aid. So I think it's changed tremendously. I think it's given more self-confidence to Africa, and I think that's good.
What about the cultural impact of the United States? Obviously, it has a huge advantage there. Can China be a player there as well?
I think the advantage is going to be more to the United States for the long term. I think the diaspora is one. I think the music scene, the language, and so forth. But clearly, China has worked well with that. As the largest trading partner, I think France is still the largest investor, but as the largest trading partner, China has done well with that.
We know African leaders are going to be coming to Washington next year. What should we look for there, briefly, if you can? I
think several things. One is a more broader approach to Africa than, say, China's summit with Africa has been. China's summit was largely on economics. I think the United States should be as well, but also it's going to be broader in terms of leadership development, in terms of beyond simply be working on health as well. It's going to be more than economics.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Stephen, thanks so much for coming in. Certainly
Thank you.
Appreciate your analysis.